Hi everyone, we're going to get started in another minute or two, just waiting for a few more attendees to join and get settled in. Okay everyone, I think we can go ahead and get started now. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Cody and I'm the portfolio strategist here at CLEAResult. That is be focusing on our customer demand programs. And today I'll be giving a webinar presentation on the lighting updates and federal standard changes for LEDs and other energy efficient products that we're currently focusing on. Before I get started, just a little bit of background information on myself. I've been working in the energy efficiency industry for a little over 10 years now. My focus has been on energy efficiency, retail-based energy efficiency programs, and I have been with CLEAResult for my time here in the industry. CLEAResult is the largest implementer of third-party retail-based energy efficiency programs. We have over 50 programs throughout the country. That scale gives us the ability to collect a lot of information and data on this topic throughout the country, which we can share with our clients. Also, just a couple of housekeeping items. We do ask that everyone hold their questions for the end of the presentation, just to ensure we can get through all the content. The best way to ask a question will be to type it into the question box, as you see here at the bottom. All of the questions will be recorded, so in the event that we don't have a chance to get to your specific question, we'll be able to run a report after the webinar, and we'll get back to you personally. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see how you've elected to call into the phone, into the webinar. So if for some reason you have trouble hearing the audio during the presentation, you can try accessing through another means. Okay, let's get into the agenda for today's webinar. I'll start off with going over a overview of the federal lighting legislation as it pertains to ISA. I'll also go over some state level legislation that we're seeing throughout the country, provide you with some data on market trends in the lighting industry, and give you our recommendations for how we see this playing out and evolving your programs going into the future. While lighting's been the primary focus for many of us, we do want to make sure that we cover federal standard and Energy Star specification updates on other products as well. So I'll be going through those changes for pool pumps, room air purifiers, water coolers, and water heaters. So let's get into lighting. One of the main elements or themes you're going to hear from this presentation a lot is that a lighting program requires a delicate balance between three things. Those three things are socket saturation, customer purchase decisions, and incremental cost. If all three of these elements are in alignment, it makes sense to continue with an energy efficient program and incentives on LEDs. When we're talking socket saturation, we're talking about the percentage of customers where the majority of the sockets in their household have been converted to energy efficient lighting. Purchase decisions refers to the consumer's ability to choose between multiple lighting options in the market. That includes LED, CFL, halogen, incandescent, all the different lighting technologies that are available. Then when we're talking about incremental costs, we're talking about the difference in cost between LEDs and other lighting options that are in the market as well. So as it pertains to the federal ISO legislation, the DOE did issue a final rulemaking. It's only been 3 or 4 years here in the making, so it's glad to see that they finally did issue a final rulemaking. And this final rule is pretty much in alignment with what their preliminary or draft rule was that they came out with in November. So pretty quietly in between the Christmas and New Year's holiday, they finalized the rulemaking for general service lamps. And in this rulemaking, they stated 4 key points. The first one being that a revised rulemaking at this time is not economically justified. So at this time, they are not going to require an increased efficacy requirement for general service lamps. They also stated that any state, including California and Nevada, are precluded from adopting energy conservation standards for covered lamps, both before and after a federal standard becomes effective. This is important because we've seen a lot of states that have tried to kind of protect against this federal rulemaking by introducing a state legislation on lighting. But what the DOE has come out here and said is that all states must follow the federal standard. And there's a number of reasons why that's the case, primarily to avoid confusion in the market and to avoid confusion, with manufacturers and retailers and their supply chains. But we'll get into a little bit more of that later on in the presentation. Third, the DOE was directed to initiate a second rulemaking cycle. They must begin that rulemaking cycle by January 1, 2020. And this rulemaking cycle is not limited to incandescent lamp technologies. So with the first point, when the DOE made their rulemaking that a revised efficacy requirement is not economically justified, they did so on the basis of trying to find an incandescent lamp technology that could meet a 45 lumens per watt requirement and that consumers would actually purchase in the marketplace. And what they found was that the best technology that manufacturers could create was an incandescent lamp that met 34 lumens per watt. But in order to get that, the product would sell for about $7 a bulb at retail, which given the current price of LEDs, which are a much more energy efficient product, the determination was made that no consumers would buy that product. So in this next rulemaking cycle, the DOE will not be limited to just incandescent lamp technologies, and they'll be able to consider other lamp technologies such as LEDs. So we'll see what comes out of this second rulemaking cycle. And the last point that we want to make is that any final rulemaking that comes of this second phase of the rulemaking cycle cannot go into effect any sooner than 3 years from the date the rulemaking is completed. So if you assume that this next rulemaking is completed by the end of this year, the earliest that could go into effect would be January 1 of 2024. So still quite a ways out for any revised rulemaking here after this final rule. And I do have a link here at the bottom. We will be sending this presentation out to everyone after the call. So you will have the ability to click on the link there and read the final rulemaking from the DOE. So how does this all play into some of the state legislations that are out there and that are pending? So created a quick map here to show you some of the states that have initiated or actually enforced some state legislations. The 4 states that are highlighted in yellow, Vermont, Colorado, Nevada, and Washington, have all passed state legislation regulating lighting. They just haven't enforced it yet. California is highlighted in green because they have enforced their state legislation on lighting. Each state legislation is a little bit different. Not all of them have the same requirements. Some states, such as Colorado, want to include all lighting products in the definition, or I'm sorry, not include all lighting products in the definition of a general service lamp. So they would classify general service lamp as just the A-line lamps. But in California, they wanted to include all lighting products in their legislation. In Washington, again, a little bit different. Their state legislation is based on a manufactured date. So essentially all lamps that are manufactured on or after January 1, 2020 must meet a 45 lumen per watt efficacy requirement, but any lamps manufactured previous to that do not need to meet that requirement. So that gives manufacturers a little bit of a loophole to continue selling non-compliant products that were manufactured before January 1, 2020. But again, that legislation isn't in effect and isn't being enforced. It's just what is currently passed their state house. So moving on to give you a little more detail as far as what's going on in California. On November 13th, the California Energy Commission did announce that they would be adopting a 45 lumen per watt efficacy requirement, despite what at the time was the DOE's initial rulemaking, not their final rulemaking. And then on December 19th, NEMA, who's the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, and the ALA introduced a lawsuit against the CEC to kind of preempt their decision. Essentially, NEMA and the ALA, their thinking is that since the DOE is going to announce that states must follow the federal legislation, that states should not be able to adopt their own federal standard. However, the California Court Eastern District ruled against NEMA and the ALA, ruling that California can indeed institute a state-level legislation on lighting. And on January 1, 2020, that 45 lumen per watt efficacy requirement did go into effect in the state of California. It was anticipated, and NEMA and the ALA did state that they would continue to fight this. However, they did drop their lawsuit against the CEC on January 14th of 2020. So it seems like they're currently, conceding California at the time. That's not to say that there won't potentially be further legislation or litigation, down the road. But as of right now, California is the only state currently with this 45 lumen per watt efficacy requirement in place. So how is all this information going to impact my program? It's important to note that even with the reduced savings that we're seeing from lighting, lighting is going to remain one of, if not the most cost-effective measure for a retail energy efficiency program to promote. We have seen some programs that have seen savings drop into the single digits, but given some, the lower incentive cost for LEDs, it can still be pretty cost-effective measure to promote. Based on the DOE's rulemaking, it is clear that the federal legislation is not going to transform the lighting market. Some jurisdictions had already kind of assumed that the 45 lumen per watt efficacy requirement was going to go into effect. But since that's not the case, we still feel it important to continue to promote LEDs so long as those three elements I talked about earlier in the presentation are in place. You want to make sure both inefficient and efficient lighting options are existent in the market and that the customer has a purchase option to make at retail. It's important to make sure that there is still an incremental cost between the inefficient and efficient lighting options. And you want to make sure your market isn't already transformed. And by that, I mean you want to make sure socket saturation is below that 80 to 90% range. And I'll be getting into a little bit more detail as far as the data we're seeing in the lighting market on a national basis with regard to these three elements here. However, if you are continuing lighting programs, there's three things you should still be aware of. Be prepared for declining net to gross values. We are seeing that evaluators are being a little bit more strict as pertains to lighting, and the incentives aren't having as much of an impact on the customer's purchase decision as they previously had, which as programs mature, we can expect to see, but net to gross values are declining. This will have more of an impact on those programs that are in a net savings environment. Again, if your program is in a gross savings environment, this shouldn't have much of an impact on you. As I mentioned before, lower savings. This is on both an annual and a lifetime savings basis. So we are seeing some programs that are reducing the annual energy savings from lighting. And that's for a couple of reasons. Primarily, some programs have already baked in a baseline change, so that they're assuming a lower baseline for the efficient product to be compared to, which is impacting the savings. We've also seen some programs that have made adjustments to their hours of use, which is essentially meaning they feel that LEDs at this point are now being installed in lower use sockets, whereas before when the programs were just beginning, they were being installed in higher use sockets, your kitchens, your bathrooms, your bedrooms, but now they're being installed more in basements or closets and hallways and things that don't have as high of hours of use, which can impact the savings. And you should expect to see some decreasing sales and installations. Again, this is evident of any program that gets a little bit more mature. As the lighting market, more LEDs are installed in homes, they're going to last longer, and consumers aren't going to need to purchase them quite as often. So do keep in mind to expect to see decreasing sales as well. Some of the trends we're currently seeing in the lighting market, and we've broken our clients out into two buckets, those clients that are continuing with lighting and those clients that have decided to move away from lighting. For those clients of ours that are continuing with lighting, we are seeing an increased focus on low to moderate income customers. There's been some studies out there that suggest that customers who are low to moderate income and not necessarily your market rate customers are a little bit behind on the energy efficiency journey. So they may not have as high of installation rates or high socket saturation as your market rate customers do. So it's still important to include incentives for that and also they're the ones who are most in need of that incentive as well, because they may not be able to afford the difference in cost between an LED and a halogen or incandescent lamp. Some programs are designed to go with specialty lighting only programs, and they're maximizing all the savings potential they can from this product. This was more prevalent when it was a little bit unknown as to how general service lamps would be impacted by the legislation, but we are still seeing programs continue with just specialty lighting only at this time. We are seeing some increased interest in connected lighting and light fixtures. These products are not impacted by the DOE's rulemaking or any state legislation. However, it's still pretty early in the game for connected lighting, that it doesn't have at that high of a market penetration, and there really isn't any additional savings right now that can be claimed from connected lighting. I think I've seen research reports out there that state about 1 to 3 additional kWh potentially, but then there are some reports out there that say there isn't any savings, and sometimes there's savings that are less. So it's all kind of dependent on the studies, and it's still pretty new and early technology to make a determination there. And some programs are electing to only apply incentives to off-shelf products, and this gets back to that protecting against that declining net to gross. So essentially, if a customer is going into a store and they're heading to the lighting aisle, chances are their purpose for that visit was to make a lighting purchase, and for the most part, that customer is going to decide to purchase an LED. Whereas if you get off-shelf placement for your incentivized LEDs, the odds of that incentive and that placement of the product impacting that customer's decision to purchase it is going to be greater. So you won't see as low of net to gross values on in those retail stores. We have the off-shelf products that are specifically shipped in, as well as in some of those retail locations that build off-shelf displays for us. For those clients that have elected to remove lighting from their programs, they are adding more non-lighting measures. This includes everything from smart thermostats to pool pumps to your traditional white good appliances, all the way to weatherization products like door sweeps, weather stripping, outlet insulation, spray foam insulation, all those different types of measures that can still be purchased at retail, primarily your DIY retailers, Home Depot and Lowe's, for that customer who chooses to make those upgrades themselves. And we are starting to see those types of products expand more in the market. Programs are considering more of a midstream and upstream incentive delivery model as opposed to a downstream incentive on those non-lighting measures. So when we're talking midstream and upstream, the reason to offer those types of incentive delivery models is to increase participation. With a downstream rebate, you typically run into pretty high breakage rates, which is the percentage of customers who buy a qualifying product but don't submit their rebate form for it. Midstream and upstream programs significantly reduce and in some cases eliminate that breakage level, so you can get credit for more sales and more savings with the program. And we're also seeing clients elect to increase savings from other sources. This could be anything from a behavioral program to HVAC programs, anything outside of this retail energy efficiency world as well. So a lot of different options across all the clients and programs that we're seeing here. Now I'm going to get into some of the market analysis that we've done based on some of the programs that we've done this research and shelf surveys for. Before I get into the results of the analysis, a little bit of background. We will be going over product stocking and product pricing levels at the various retailers where we did these shelf surveys across the country. And when you see the graphs that I'll be showing in subsequent slides, just to give you some idea as to how the retailers were categorized. Big box retailers refer to Home Depot and Lowe's. Mass merchants refer to Target and Walmart. Your dollar channel are Dollar Tree and Dollar General. And then the independent hardware are Ace Hardware, True Value, and Do It Best. So let's take a look at A-line product stocking first. As you can see here, the red bars are indicative of inefficient lighting products, such as your incandescent and halogen. The dark blue is indicative of the efficient lighting products, and those are primarily your LEDs, although in some cases CFLs are still on the shelves as well. So contrary to popular belief, there are still quite a bit of inefficient products that are found on the shelves at retailers. Again, primarily more in that independent hardware, dollar, and big box channels, although mass merchants do still carry them as well. And this is also important. You can see here independent hardware and dollar have a higher percentage of inefficient products on their shelves, and that's to be expected just based on the customer demographic that they serve. One of the things that's important to note is that in discussions we've had with retailers and manufacturers, manufacturers are still going to produce and retailers are still going to sell products where there's a demand for them. So it's pretty indicative here where you can see the higher demand for the inefficient products are in those stores where that demand exists. As it relates to reflector products, again, you can see here that both inefficient and efficient options exist across all of the retail channels we examined. And in the case of dollar and independent hardware, it's significantly dominated by the inefficient lighting products. And that's because the reflector product hasn't been something that those retailers have typically sold as it relates to an LED product. You can see the graph on the right. Dollar stores do not sell any PAR product, and that's simply because the price point of a PAR reflector lamp is outside of the model of the dollar store. So they don't sell that product at all. With the BR and R, they do sell it, but they sell it solely with the inefficient technology. Although we have had some success in parts of the country with getting manufacturers to ship in the BR and R products. They just weren't part of this study when we did it. So again, this demonstrates that there are both inefficient and efficient lighting options available in the reflector category at the retailers that we examined. The last product category are the decorative lighting. So these are your globe and candelabra products. Again, the dollar and independent hardware stores are primarily inefficient lighting options as it relates to decorative products with what they stock. And the big box and mass merchant are more in favor of the LED. However, there are still upwards of between 20 and 30% inefficient products on the shelves in those stores. Now we're going to take a look at the incremental cost of each of these types of products. We'll first start with the A-line product. The light blue box represents the cost of an efficient product, so that's your LED. The inefficient products represented by the dark blue, that's going to be your halogen or incandescent lamp. And then the yellow represents the incremental cost, which is the difference between the two. So you can see there is an incremental cost across all retail channels for the A-line LEDs. This demonstrates that there is still a need for consumers, or still a need for utility-sponsored incentives to help consumers reduce the cost of that efficient purchase. There has been some thought in the market that LED pricing is going to continue to decrease and decrease and decrease. In discussions we've had with manufacturers, it's not going to be the case, whereas in previous years you saw fairly steady, 15 to 20 to 30% price declines. A lot of the efficiencies have kind of been taken out, whereas some manufacturers are stating any price declines you do see in LEDs are going to be much smaller than you have seen in the past. So important to note that the incremental cost for A-line LEDs is still well in effect. On the reflector side, you actually see a little bit of a different story here. So as it relates to BR and R products on the left, you do see at the mass merchant channel that they're pretty similar in price, where there really isn't much of an incremental cost on the reflector products. And then when you look at the right on the PAR products, you can see at the big box retailers, there really isn't any cost difference with that product type. However, you can see independent hardware in both categories, the BR, Rs, and PARs. There is still a significant incremental cost between those two products there. And then at the mass merchants and big box, there is still some incremental cost on the BRs at big box and at the PARs during at the mass merchants. And again, you see the dollar stores do not currently carry any PAR products on their shelves, so no data there to analyze. And as it relates to the BR and R, only inefficient products were there. So that's why there's no incremental cost for that product. And then lastly, here's a decorative category. You can see that there's a significant incremental cost pretty much across the board at all retailers on the decorative category. Again, at the dollar stores, there was no efficient product on the shelf to compare it to, so which is why there's no incremental cost there. But this would suggest there's a good opportunity to potentially work with a manufacturer to get those products shipped into those stores. It may require a slightly higher incentive than you're used to get the products down to a price where the dollar stores will carry them. But it might be good because you're reaching a demographic of customer that you haven't reached before with this product. And it'll also show evaluators the impact of getting that product into those stores and have it available to that customer base. This data here is 2018 market share data, and it is from Apex Analytics. So some of you may be familiar with their Creed Light Tracker data, where they're able to collect sales data from various retailers across the country and analyze it to determine what the market share for different types of LED products and other lighting options are in the market right now. So this is 2018 data. The 2019 data we did not have access to at this time. The graph on the left looks at all US states. This looks at LED sales for all US states. The graph on the right looks at those states that do not have programs. And what you can see is, for the most part, reflectors are the one product where there isn't a difference. But for the most part, you can see with the A lines and decorative products that states that have programs tend to have a higher market share than the states with don't. So that tells you right there that incentives are playing a role in impacting the market share of LED products. So those states that have incentives have a higher market share than those states that do not. And what we're seeing here is the biggest opportunity right now for long-term energy savings in the lighting category exists with decorative lamps. So you saw in the previous graphs and data that we shared from the shelf surveys, there's still a significant amount of inefficient lighting products in the decorative category on retailer shelves, and there's still a pretty significant incremental cost difference that we need to make up through utility-sponsored incentives. This last graph here shows that the market share is fairly low, sub 35% for candelabra and globe products. So that's the product that has the largest long-term upside that we're seeing in the market right now for LED incentives. The next thing I want to talk about is consumer backsliding. So consumer backsliding is essentially when an LED lighting incentive program has been in place for quite a while, and that program has elected to remove the incentives and put their money elsewhere. In this scenario, what happens in the lighting market? Does LED sales continue to outpace that of halogen sales, or at some point do halogen sales overtake LED sales? And it's at that point where halogen sales overtake LED sales that you start to see consumer backsliding. And you do want to protect, we've put a lot of work and a lot of effort into these lighting programs over the years. We do want to protect that savings that we've achieved throughout that time. We don't want to see consumers start to make poor lighting energy efficiency decisions at retail. The chart you see here on the left, this data is all from Walmart. Walmart's, we feel, is a pretty good retailer to get a pulse on a broad range of the market across all different types of customers. They serve everything from your market rate customers to your low to moderate income customers. So we feel they're a pretty good gauge on the industry in general. So this program here had incentives in place on A-line LEDs. And you can see at the height, they were reaching about 20,000 units sold per month. And that was at the height of the program in roughly June of 2018. At that time, the program elected to reduce their incentives on LEDs, and you can see they had about a 50% drop in sales, whereas sales went from 20,000 per month down to about 10,000 per month. So pretty significant difference just from dropping the amount of the incentive. Next, the program then elected to increase incentives on one high volume SKU. Didn't see much difference in sales. They maintained right around that 10,000 units per month level. And then January 1 of 2019, this program elected to remove LED A-line incentives altogether. And you saw, again, another 50% drop in sales from that 10,000 level down below 5,000 units per month. So this shows pretty indicatively that LED incentives have a significant impact on sales in the service territory. At the same time, this graph on the right looks at how halogen sales reacted during this time period. You can see the trend line over this period of time is up. Whereas when they first decided to decrease incentives, halogen sales were in the 3,000 to 5,000 units per month range, still well below what the program was doing. When incentives were removed, however, in January 1, 2020 or January 1 of 2019, halogen sales spiked the next month to over 6,000 units per month, which surpasses the less than 5,000 per month sales that were happening on LEDs. So this shows you that in this service territory, there was consumer backsliding when incentives were removed, which is something we do want to protect against. We do understand under certain circumstances that wheels have been set in motion where LED incentives were needed to be removed because there was a plan in place and the program can no longer claim the savings anyway. But we do feel it is important to try to make the argument to bring those incentives back to monitor the market after the incentives are removed to see how consumers react. This slide is just a second example of consumer backsliding. So we had some pre-programmed sales data available to us, represented by the halogen units in the orange and the LED in the dark blue. So prior to the program, halogen sales were were higher than the LED sales, the cost of the halogen was much lower than the cost of the LED. However, when the program started, the cost of the LED became more in line with the cost of the halogen lamp. LED sales were significantly higher than halogen sales. However, once the program shut down about 6 months later, it went back to what the program was like before incentives were in place. Halogen product cost significantly less than the LED. LED prices went up, halogen remained steady, and the halogen sales surpassed those of LEDs yet again. And it was pretty much the month after the program was shut off. So consumer backsliding can happen pretty quickly. And the reason it happens pretty quickly is because most lighting products are sold in multi-pack configurations, your 4-packs, your 6-packs. So that $1 to $2 of incremental cost can quickly turn into $4 to $8 price differences at the retailer. So when the customer goes to buy the product, we may say, and we may be thinking in the back of our head, okay, there's only a $1 difference in the cost of a LED compared to a halogen. When you multiply it by 4 or 6, then all of a sudden the consumer's paying significantly more at the register for the LEDs than they are the halogens. In a lot of cases, consumers are very price sensitive when it comes to lighting, and they're going to purchase the lowest cost option available to them. And since the DOE and the federal government is not going to transform the lighting market for us, it's still important to offer some level of lighting incentives to reduce that incremental cost and make that purchase decision a little bit more in favor of the LED efficient option for consumers. We all know that lighting inevitably is going to go away from programs, and at some point it's not going to be a viable measure for us to promote. So how are lighting programs and retail energy efficiency programs going to evolve in a post-lighting environment? Like I said before, we are seeing some expansion in non-lighting offerings. It's important to offer a full suite of non-lighting measures, everything from your traditional white good appliances to smaller appliances such as air purifiers, dehumidifiers, even some room air conditioners. Smart thermostats have certainly been a very popular measure lately as well. And we're also seeing some interest, like I mentioned, in the weatherization products as well. They're pretty cost effective, low incentives. And in jurisdictions where there are energy savings numbers available through TRMs, it's a pretty cost-effective measure to promote. Midstream and upstream incentive models are a great way to get additional savings from these product categories. It reduces or eliminates breakage, so the program can claim more energy savings and more sales from them. It also makes it easier for the customer to participate in the program. They don't necessarily have to fill out a rebate form and then wait 4 to 6 weeks for a rebate check to come in the mail. The idea is that all of the rebates and incentives are applied instantly at the point of purchase. So it makes it a streamlined, seamless participation for that customer, and it makes it better for the program from a savings standpoint. As I just mentioned, instant rebates, the easier you make it for a customer to participate in the program, the more likely they will, and the more likely you'll be able to achieve more savings in your program. When we think about retail, the distributor channel sometimes gets left out of the mix. So it's important to make sure you're engaging that distributor channel, especially with your water heating products, your pool pump products, and your HVAC products. Definitely don't want to forget about the distributor channel. And lastly, we do think that there's a lot of synergies between retail-based programs and electrification, demand response, and time of use programs. When you start looking at what it takes for a customer to participate in an electrification or a demand response program, it typically takes them purchasing something, whether that's a smart thermostat or another connected device, or deciding to purchase something that's electric powered versus gas powered. All of it starts with a customer needing to make some type of purchase decision. So a retail program can be a great gateway into reaching customers who you want to get to participate in those programs. We have a handful of clients that are looking to promote electric powered lawn equipment as opposed to gas powered lawn equipment. That's both kind of an electrification and greenhouse gas emissions reductions play there. And we have a lot of clients who are promoting the purchase of smart thermostats, and we're able to combine energy efficiency incentives and discounts with those of enrolling in demand response programs. So a great way to utilize an existing retail-based program is to expand the scope into these other initiatives you may be offering with electrification and demand response. Some of our recommendations here, there's a number of different pathways that you can take with this type of a program. This is only one example of a pathway, but we feel it all begins with conducting a shelf survey or socket saturation analysis and getting some information and some data that you can use to make a more informed decision with when to eliminate a lighting incentive discount program. After you've conducted that survey, you may find that it's still appropriate to offer incentives across a broad range of your clients and or your customers and across a broad range of retailers as well. Or you may find through that analysis that maybe you want to target a subset of your customer base, like your low to moderate income customers, and only offer lighting incentives to that customer base. But either way, we do feel you should start off with a shelf survey or a socket saturation analysis. And CLEAResult can help with that. We have done shelf surveys for a number of our clients as well. So get in touch with your local program teams. They'll get in touch with myself on our National Solutions Group team, and we can formulate a strategy for how to do that analysis and get you some results so you can see what your territory is like. Not every territory is going to be the same. Programs that have had incentives in place for a longer period of time and have promoted lighting more aggressively may have a higher saturation rate than other territories as well. So always important to get the information that's specific to your service territory, since it will change. Once you've done the analysis and you figured out what you want to do as far as targeting incentives, it's important to protect the savings that you've gotten over the years against consumer backsliding by keeping some level of a lighting incentive in place. We do understand that some programs may not have this as an option. Again, the solution for every client is going to be a little bit different, but we feel one way to protect against consumer backsliding is to keep at least some level of a lighting incentive in place when it's applicable. And lastly, if you are forced to remove incentives, or you make the decision to remove incentives, you do want to monitor your program and see what is going to happen at retail after those incentives are removed. And again, we can help you with that. We have great relationships with our retailer and manufacturer partners, and we can have them check up and say, hey, what's going on in this service territory since they've turned off their lighting incentives? Are you seeing higher halogen sales and LED sales? And we can provide that information to you so that you can take that back to internally within your utility company or to your Energy Efficiency Commission to see what can be done about possibly turning incentives back on if that's the route you decide to take. So now that I've finished with lighting, we're going to get to talk about some of those other products I mentioned before, where we're also tracking federal standard changes and Energy Star specification changes and how that's going to impact your programs as well. So the first product I want to talk about is pool pumps. Pool pumps have been a pretty popular measure to promote throughout the years. You get pretty high energy savings from them, but there is going to be a new federal standard that will go into effect on May 18th of 2021. And what this federal standard states is that any pool pump that is between 1 and 5 horsepower needs to be a variable speed pool pump. So in the past, where a single speed pool pump was your baseline product and your variable speed product was your efficient product, now variable speed is going to be the baseline. So there really isn't going to be that inefficient measure to compare it against. So essentially for pool pumps that are between 1 and 5 horsepower, it's not going to be a measure you can promote through your energy efficiency programs because that savings just won't be there anymore. It is important to note that this May 18th date is a manufacturer restriction. So manufacturers cannot produce a single speed pool pump on or after May 18th of 2021. But before that date, they can still manufacture those models and sell those models at retail. So we are thinking, in discussions we've had with manufacturers of pool pumps, that there will be enough stock of single speed pool pumps in the market to warrant incentives through 2021. It's when you get into 2022 and beyond where that may not be the case, and it may be time to end your traditional variable speed pool pump incentives. With that said, there is still going to be an opportunity for pool pumps that are less than 1 horsepower. So any pool pump that is 0.99 horsepower or less can still be single speed. So therefore, you can still incentivize a customer to purchase a variable speed product. These are typically pool pumps that are used in above ground pools, other water features, fountains, ponds, those types of things that can be found at homes. This market is about 15% right now. 15% of the pool pumps in the market are less than 1 horsepower. However, manufacturers do believe that could potentially increase to 25%, given their belief that some pumps that are in the market right now are oversized for the application that they're in. So still a significantly less percentage of the market than your typical larger pool pumps are, but it could still be an option for you if you wish to continue a pool pump incentive program. Some of the key considerations you should be aware of with this change: you do want to look to maximize savings on variable speed pool pumps in your 2020 and 2021 programs. For those of you that already have a program existing, if you're thinking about starting a program, you should probably think pretty quickly, as that time for when you'll be able to claim savings is pretty small right now. You should plan for lower savings if you do continue a pool pump program. Those less than 1 horsepower pumps will save less energy than your traditional 1 to 5 horsepower pumps. So if you are going to continue with a pool pump program by promoting those smaller pumps, there will be less savings from it. We are seeing a shift in focus from energy efficiency to demand response with pool pumps. Pentair has come out with their IntelliConnect product, which can connect to any existing Pentair variable speed pool pump and make it DR enabled. So pool pump manufacturers are starting to shift their focus to demand response programs. And there is potentially a savings opportunity with pool filtration. This may be more of a commercial opportunity than a residential opportunity, but I have had some discussions with a company called Filter Balls, and they have some reports out in the market that state that they can achieve potentially upwards of 30% energy efficiency savings if a customer switches from sand as a pool filtration to their filter ball devices. Again, I think it's probably more of a commercial opportunity than a residential opportunity. They have much more documented savings on the commercial side, but something to potentially look out for and be aware of. The next product is room air purifiers. Room air purifiers are currently not regulated by a federal standard, which is why the energy savings you can get from an air purifier is pretty substantial. It can be upwards of 500 to 700 kWh, and that's just because there is no limit on the amount of energy an air purifier can use. There is, however, a proposed standard that would align with the current 2004 Energy Star specification. Again, it hasn't gone into effect and it's just currently being proposed. But if that does go into effect, there could be some implications for energy savings if there is a new federal standard that's imposed. There will be a new Energy Star specification for room air purifiers. They did finalize version 2.0, which is going to go into effect July 17th of 2020. So July of this year, there will be a new Energy Star specification for air purifiers. And the biggest difference between that specification and the current specification is that the new specification is going to be based on the clean air delivery rate for smoke, whereas the current specification is based on the clean air delivery rate for dust. So essentially what that means is that when the first specification was created back in 2004, most consumers were buying an air purifier because they were looking to eliminate dust and pollens and other types of allergens in their home. Now the thinking is that most people are buying a room air purifier because they're looking, they may smoke at home and they're looking to reduce the smoke in their home and just to make it a cleaner air environment for them. So that's the reason for that change. And with that change, we're likely to see a pretty significant decrease in the number of eligible models. Anytime there is a change in an Energy Star specification where they're making it a more stringent requirement, there is likely going to be a significant drop in the number of eligible products. So it'll be important to monitor that and potentially offer some type of grandfather period where older models were grandfathered into the program, just to allow some time for the market to adapt, because the Energy Star logo still will be on those older products in the stores. So important to give it some time to cycle through there. Per unit savings will actually likely increase with the new Energy Star specification, and that again is just because there is no federal standard in place. However, once a new federal standard does go into effect, you will likely see decreased energy savings from air purifiers, just because that baseline will be increasing and shrinking the difference between the inefficient and efficient technologies there. Next up is water coolers. Again, another product that is not currently regulated by a federal standard. However, there are 7 states, which are listed here, that have their own state standards for the hot and cold water dispensers. So when we talk about a water cooler, we're really talking about in-home water dispensing. This can either be through on-demand, where the water cooler is hooked up to the water line in your home, and the consumer has the option to turn on for hot or cold water and get it filtered through the device. This also includes the option for those water dispensers that have the large jugs on top. So a couple different types of water coolers, and this includes both of those types of water coolers. Energy Star is going to be issuing a new specification, version 3.0. Don't have a date yet as far as when it's going to go into effect, but we're expecting that new specification to be finalized in the summer of 2020. Likely about 6 months from that date is when it'll go into effect. So it could be early 2021 when the new Energy Star specification goes into effect. Again, likely a decrease in the number of eligible models. Per unit savings will go up in those jurisdictions that do not have a state standard. However, states that do have their own standards may see either no change or a small decrease in energy savings, depending on whether or not they choose to change the state specs and adopt the Energy Star spec that's currently being replaced. So again, another potential opportunity there for a change in your programs. Lastly is water heaters. Good news, there are no imminent changes for federal standards on water heaters. So the last federal standard change was in 2016. There is the potential for a new standard around 2023, since federal standards tend to change about every 6 or 7 years or so. It will be important to monitor a new potential standard in 2023. Energy Star is coming out with a new specification for water heaters. Again, don't have a date as to when it'll be into effect. But the good news is this Energy Star specification change is only going to be done so that it will follow the federal standard. And what I mean by that is the new specification, the previous Energy Star specification used EF, which is the energy factor of the model, to determine whether or not it was eligible. The new specification is going to align with federal standards which use UEF, the Unified Energy Factor. And that just takes into account optional connected capabilities with a water heater. So we are not anticipating any changes to QPLs or qualified products with this specification change. It is only being done to align with the federal standard change to allow for optional connected capabilities with water heaters. So good news there, we're not expecting anything significant to impact water heaters at this time. Lastly, before I kind of get into our final recommendations in the Q&A, there is a pretty significant change being made to how federal standards are going to be implemented going forward. The DOE recently finalized a new process rule on January 15th of 2020. This will go into effect in 60 days, so March 15th, 2020 will be when this goes into effect. And what the DOE did with this new process rule is they quote unquote modernized the federal rulemaking process. The previous standard was pretty lax and didn't have any strict requirements. It gave very generalized language, which wasn't easy to interpret and wasn't necessarily easy to hold anyone to. So this new standard put specific timelines in place, put specific requirements in place to make the rulemaking process a little bit more difficult. And the one thing that it does, it did about 8 different things. A lot of them aren't really pertinent to our types of programs, but the one thing it did state is it stated a specific amount of energy a federal standard must save in order to be considered. Previously, again, it gave very general language where it said it must save significant energy. The new standard said it must save at least 0.3 quadrillions of energy over 30 years to be considered. And this is important because, again, this wasn't in place in the previous standard. And all of the energy efficiency standards that have gone into effect previous to this, 60% would have met this threshold, 40% would have not met this threshold. So the DOE is essentially saying that they're going to be focusing on those federal standards that are going to amount to the highest energy savings, and those that don't meet this requirement, they essentially aren't going to be able to accommodate and don't necessarily have the time or the resources to dedicate to issuing new federal standards on those products. So it's important to note here that we're likely to see less or fewer federal standards go into effect in the future, which technically is a good thing for energy efficiency programs, since federal standards tend to limit the amount of savings that can be claimed through our programs. But as someone who is concerned and focused with saving energy in general to protect our environment, on a whole, I guess you could say that this is not necessarily such good news for the environment in general, but good news for energy efficiency programs, since this is going to increase the need for these types of programs, since federal standards aren't going to transform the market for us likely going forward. Again, I do have a link here to the final process rule for this, the new process for federal standards, which you can read when I send out this presentation deck. So in conclusion, do want to note several things here. Again, federal legislation is not going to transform the lighting market. The DOE has made a decision that they are not going to institute a 45 lumen per watt requirement on general service lamps. So it's still going to be up to energy efficiency programs to ensure consumers make a good, efficient purchase with lighting. California is currently the only state enforcing a 45 lumen per watt efficacy requirement. However, there are other states who have already passed legislation and about 14 other states that are currently considering their own state legislation. It'll be interesting to see what comes of that given the decision that was made in California, but we'll keep everyone updated on what is happening in your specific states as well. Decorative lamps currently represent what we think is the largest long-term savings opportunity with residential lighting at this time, due to the high number of inefficient products on the shelf, the higher incremental cost, and the low market share currently for decorative lamps. Consumer backsliding is a concern. We have probably a half a dozen examples of how this has happened in previous or in other programs across the country. Consumer backsliding, it happens. So this is something you should be aware of and something you should be tracking in your programs if you do decide to turn off your incentives. Again, CLEAResult can help with any shelf studies, self-surveys, analysis that you want to have done on your market. Get in touch with your local program teams. They'll put in an optimization request to our national team, and we'll begin working together as a group to formulate the best strategy for you. Don't want to forget about federal standard changes for non-lighting measures. I went through those as it relates to pool pumps, room air purifiers, water coolers, and water heaters. So we are all monitoring those measures. And again, we'll be working with the local program teams to make any necessary adjustments to your programs based on how those standard changes could affect your programs. And lastly, we are anticipating federal standard changes to become less frequent in the future. Good news for energy efficiency programs, not necessarily as good of news for those of us concerned about the environment. But something to consider and something to be aware of, that energy efficiency programs are still going to be much needed because of this. Okay, at this time, we'll begin taking any questions that have come through. Barbara Weiss, who is on the line, she has been kind enough to kind of handle a lot of the Q&A portion of this that has come through. So Barbara, any questions from the audience so far?
Yes, we do have a number of questions coming through. So we'll start with this one. In the cost for A-lamps, does this include any smart lamps? If smart lamps are included in this, does that make it so you are not totally comparing apples to apples with a halogen lamp?
Yep, connected LEDs were not included in the shelf survey analysis. So we were comparing your general LED A lamp. It is important to note we were looking at Energy Star LEDs as compared to non-Energy Star LEDs. So there is a little bit of a price difference there. Energy Star LEDs tend to cost a little bit more than non-Energy Star, but we were not factoring in connected lighting.
Okay, another question. What do you attribute to the high percentage of sales of efficient products in the mass distributor category as opposed to big box?
Yeah, so the mass merchant retailers, and again, I just want to make sure I'm answering that. So the question was, why is there a higher percentage of sales of efficient products?
Yeah, in the mass distributor category versus the big box.
Right, okay. Let me go back to that chart real quick just so I can take a look at specifically what we're talking about. Okay. Okay, so this doesn't necessarily represent sales. This represents what is currently on the shelves at these stores, on the shelves at these stores. So again, big box tends to have a little bit more inefficient products than the mass merchants, but that's not to say that sales are necessarily higher at big box than mass merchant. That's level of detail we didn't have access to, but something we can look to examine going forward. As far as what is potentially making up the difference in stocking, I think it's primarily the fact that big box stores typically have a broader selection of lighting in general. If you walk into a Home Depot or Lowe's, they have an entire bay dedicated to lighting, whereas at Target and Walmart, it's a much smaller assortment of lighting. so it gives less opportunities to carry a larger stock. That's likely making up the difference in what's being stocked there.
Okay, so another question. You note that there is significant potential for decorative reflector lamps, but don't those lamps account for a much lower percentage of overall lamp purchases?
So decorative lamps, yes. So decorative lamps are not necessarily reflectors. So decorative lamps are globes and candelabra lamps. Decorative lamps do make up a significantly less number of sockets in a home. So typically 30% of the sockets in a home are in the specialty category, which are your reflectors and your decorative products. And of that, probably 40% are maybe decorative. Could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower depending on your home. And the reason we're just saying it's probably the longest term, the most opportunity long term, is because at some point your A-line and your reflector categories are going to become transformed. They have a much higher market share right now. So when you look at the market share, reflectors are already at 73% essentially, and this was 2018 data. So if you look at 2019 data, it's probably closer to 80%. Your A-lines are probably closer to 60-65%. But your decorative categories are still probably likely under 40% market share. So I think incentives are going to be needed for a much longer time on the decorative products. However, they do make up a smaller share of your sales. That is correct.
Okay, on slide 10, what is your definition of connected lighting?
So a connected lighting is anything that can be controlled remotely through through either a hub or your smartphone on an app on your smartphone. Typical examples, this is like your Philips Hue type product. Other manufacturers, TCP has come up with connected products as well. So just anything, it refers to any type of LED that can be controlled remotely.
Okay. For utilities who have removed A19 lamps from their market rate lighting programs because they are impacted by CPAS, where the lifetime savings of a measure is a concern, does CLEAResult recommend keeping the A19 lamps out of the market rate lighting programs?
Illinois is a interesting situation. I would say because the persistent savings isn't there, I would first try to make the argument to the folks in Illinois that since the baseline change isn't going to go into effect, I think the decision was kind of based on the fact that the likelihood of there being some type of baseline change over the next few years is highly likely. I think the DOE's final decision here has said that for at least the next 3 years, potentially longer, 4 years plus, there isn't going to be a baseline change. I would try to make the argument to extend the lifetime of LEDs to the market rate customers and have it based more on what the saturation level is in the state, based on how long it'll take to achieve that 80 to 90% saturation level in Illinois, as opposed to simply saying, okay, halogen lamps aren't going to be around anymore. So we'll allow 1 to 2 years of lifetime savings on LEDs, and because of that, it's not really cost effective from a CPAS standpoint in Illinois. I would first try to make the argument to do the socket saturation analysis to find out where things are in Illinois, and based on that, come up with a determination for how long it'll take to transform the market and make that kind of the new lifetime basis, rather than just kind of a random 1 to 2 year lifetime, which is currently what's being used.
Is there a concern about grouping Energy Star and non-Energy Star LED products into the same category?
I think from an energy saving standpoint, there isn't much of a difference. The difference comes from a product performance standpoint. Energy Star LEDs are going to have a little bit longer of a lifetime, minimum of 15,000 hours. Your non-Energy Star products are typically anywhere between 8 and 12,000 hours. There's some slight differences in the number of lumens, which measures brightness. So there could be some difference in the light quality of the non-Energy Star product. But if you're just looking at the difference in wattage between a non-Energy Star LED, an LED, and a halogen, there isn't going to be much difference from an energy saving standpoint. So if energy saving is your primary concern, I would say there's no real difference there. or no real concern. But if you have some concerns about product performance and potential customer satisfaction issues with non-Energy Star, that might be a reason to not bundle them together.
How many states or jurisdictions were included as part of the lighting analysis?
Yep, so that was done. So it's a little tough to tell states because some of them are multi-state programs. I would say states, there were probably 6 different states that were included in that. Jurisdictions, if you're talking individual utility jurisdictions, there was quite a few more than that. It would probably be closer to 40 different jurisdictions.
What role do you see smart home products playing in the next years?
I would say smart home products, the thing we need to figure out first is, do they save energy? Energy Star has come out with a smart home energy management system specification called SHEMS. And through that specification, one of the things they're trying to determine is, do these smart home and connected home products actually save energy? Do consumers use them in a way that improves their or decreases their energy usage? And I think it's still a little too early to tell. I think right now we're seeing the primary interest in being pilots as it relates to connected home and smart home products, where we're trying to determine what that energy savings looks like. So I would say the near-term opportunity is with pilots. Long-term opportunity is to be determined based on the results of those pilots.
Okay, so we're just after the hour. We're going to wrap up at this time. We will send out any answers to the questions that we were not able to respond to during the course of the webinar.
Thank you, Barbara. I do want to mention to everyone, we are going to be sending out a short survey after the webinar today. Please do take a minute or two to complete that survey. It'll help us with future webinars that we do want to conduct for our clients as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and have a great day.